All right, if we could go ahead and take our seats. I promise you guys you can talk after the conference, but we're going to get started with our last speaker of the day. All right, and as you can see, we do have one final polling question for you to participate in. In 4 words or less, what tools are missing that you need to help to improve your soil health? Okay. It's easy. All right. Great. All right, so while we're filling that out, I wanted to introduce our next speaker. Again, we have another doctor with us today, amazing. Dr. Brent Young serves as an agricultural business management economist with Colorado State University Extension. Brent strives to help farmers and ranchers manage risk through development, delivery, and evaluation of non-credit educational programming. Additionally, he provides information on Farm Bill Title I production support and Title XI commodity insurance programs, crop and livestock enterprise analysis, financial management strategies, and commodity marketing. Please help me welcome Brent to the stage. Forward, reverse, pointer.
Forward, reverse. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Great.
And if you stay between the blue lines, if you think you're going to move, I'll get you a handheld.
Okay, I think I'll be fine. Well, good afternoon. Glad to be here this afternoon. I was just pondering this during break. This is my 19th year in Extension. First year to ever be invited to speak in Boulder County. When I finish, you might think, well, that makes a lot of sense. I do have a question for you. How many of you have had it up to here by this time of all of the dynamic PowerPoints full of beautiful photos and embedded videos? Up to here. Yeah, me too. Ladies and gentlemen, that's why you put the Ag Economist on the program last. Yeah. Prepare to be underwhelmed. Yeah. And you know what makes perfect sense? I represent a group of highly trained, in-demand social scientists who are world-renowned for our ability to accurately predict the past. Now, because this is my first time in Boulder County, and that my typical audience would be large-scale commodity-based producers, of which I am one myself, I am going to ask you not to harsh my mellow. Okay, I feel pretty mellow right now. So I may talk about things, inputs, for example, that you don't use. If I say something that really doesn't jive with you, just insert something else, like compost, or compost tea, or manure, which we do use a lot of manure. And I've been told that I fling a lot of it as well. That's another story. So let's go ahead and get started. I do want to tell you a little bit about myself. In addition to my work with an Extension, I'm also a farmer, and I'm on happen to be involved with a 3rd-generation farm. This is actually a photo taken in 2014. I'm in the combine with my grandson Aiden, my son Nate, and daughter-in-law Andrea are in the semi, and then my daughter Carla my wife Carla and my granddaughter Allie are in the tractor. And as I looked at this, and especially this conference has really inspired me, I looked at that and thought, wow, we've done a lot in a short period of time. Those were actually 2 fields in 2014. Now they're 1 field. They were flood irrigated. Now they're irrigated with the center pivot irrigation system. You can't really see it in the photo, but the tillage tool that's being pulled by the tractor is a disc chisel, which is a vertical till machine. And we've almost eliminated that machine. When these fields were flood irrigated, from the time that we harvested the crop till we planted the next crop, we would run across these fields 6 to 8 times. They were flood irrigated, we had to. Under center pivot irrigation, from the time that we harvest until we plant, we run across the field once. And so we've made some tremendous improvements in our operation, and I think those have brought about some real changes in our soil health. In terms of crops, we raised soybeans. This is actually 2014 as well, which was a good soybean year. That's a 4-pod soybean pod. The day that photo was taken, I was out checking a center pivot irrigation system with my grandson. At that point, I think Aiden was 12 and he was always in the way. And I said, Aiden, I'll bet you a soda you can't find a 4-bean pod, thinking that would take him 15, 20 minutes and I could get done what I need to do. Well, it was a good soybean year, and about 30 seconds later, he has the pod, and I was out a bottle of pop. We also raised alfalfa, sugar beets in rotation, and corn, and then our most important crop, of course, would be those grandkids. The other hat that I wear is I'm a regional extension specialist. My area of specialty is agriculture and business management. I'm housed at the Northeast Regional Engagement Center in Sterling. It's 304 Main, if you're not familiar with that, or if you are familiar with Sterling. It's right across the street from the Logan County Courthouse. Now, as with most extension staff, I've got a job description that's about that long, but I drill it down to really one thing. My major responsibility is to help farmers and ranchers manage risk. We all know that agriculture is a very risky business, and those that succeed in agriculture learn over time to manage risk. So here's a question that keeps me up at night. Now, if you know my wife, and you were to say, what keeps Brent up at night? She would say nothing. He keeps me up at night. But with that said, the question is, will $5 corn and $6 wheat cash flow $350 a ton UAN, $4 diesel, and 10% operating interest? Again, if you don't like UAN, substitute that for compost tea. So that's kind of a scary thing to think about. So desperate times call for desperate measures. How many of you would agree with that? Sure, yeah, that makes sense. So last spring, when things were looking pretty bad, even a little worse than they do this coming spring for input prices, I thought I'd take part of this equation in my own hands and help my family out. So I placed an ad in all of the newspapers in northeastern Colorado, hoping that someone, if just one person, would take me up on this offer. Not a one, no one. Now, I had done my research. I contacted our CPA and I asked, could any of my ensemble be tax deductible? She assured me the sparkly boots, matching shorts, and cap were tax deductible. So I was ready to go. I just didn't have any takers. So let's take a look at what's happening with input prices. Now, again, as an economist, I like to use graphs. They're not very sexy. Maybe to you. To me, they are. That's why I'm different. I'm okay with that. But basically what I want you to concentrate on here is the 2023 line, which is that gray line with the yellow dots in it. Now, as you look at that, you think, things are looking pretty good. That input fertilizer, as on an average, all the types of fertilizer is going down. But really, when you take a look at this, we're taking a look at the percentage change from a prior year. And so although we've seen a decline relative to other years in the cost of fertilizer, we still see it at rates that are much higher than we typically do. So fertilizer as an input has the rate of increase has gone down, but it's still relatively expensive. If we look at the agricultural chemicals, we see the same thing. Again, the rate of increase has decreased. However, we're off some pretty substantial increases. Look at that 2022 line, which is that top line. We had year-to-year changes. That particular input was up over 40%. Diesel fuel, again, the same story. Fortunately, prices are going down, but again, just down in terms of percentage of increase. Very important point to take a look at, another very important input, machinery prices, again, kind of the same story. One thing that's good is we've seen that over time, The supply chains have got better. We can at least get these needed parts. This also gives you an idea who might be one of the most important people on the operation. That person happens to be the one that doesn't break crap, which is not my grandson. He breaks a lot of crap. Kind of a silver lining, if we look at cropland values, those are strong and have continued to be strong. Pretty important for farmers and ranchers, producers who are borrowing money to operate on. Their balance sheet, especially what we call the lower third of the balance sheet, which deals with those long-term assets such as land, are very strong. So they're in a good borrowing position. We see that by region, and so again, that's very important. So basically, hopefully what you've seen with the last several slides is we have a situation where input prices have come down somewhat, but they're still relatively high. Now let's concentrate on market prices, which would be the other side of that margin equation. So the number one crop produced in Colorado by acreage and by value is winter wheat. And so if we look at the Kansas City hard red winter wheat contract, you can see that we built up to about a $9 level. We had some spikes in the area of $12. That was about the time that Russia invaded Ukraine. Those markets have come off substantially. And again, that's why we put that $6 wheat in part of the equation of the things I'm concerned about. Second largest crop in Colorado by acreage and value would be corn. And again, we saw that market ramp up to $8, traded for quite some time in the $7 range, and now we're at the $5 range. And because of the ample yields that we had this year, there are some folks saying that we might be as low as the $3.50 range. So what we're trying to set up for you is a classic margin squeeze. Margin being the difference between what producers pay for inputs and what they receive for the commodities they have to sell. And typically, we see a margin squeeze from one end or the other. We typically see prices remaining relatively stable, but inputs going up, where it may be a situation where inputs are stable and market prices are going down. What we're seeing happening, and we saw this in 23, we see it's going to be maybe even greater in 24, is we see a squeeze from both ends. Inputs are coming up, and we're not getting any cheaper, and market prices are coming down. And so regardless of the size of your operation, regardless of what you produce, we all buy inputs, and we all sell crops. We all sell products, livestock, crops, honey, whatever it might be. And so a margin squeeze affects all of us. So what do we do to manage a margin squeeze? Well, there's really three things we ought to look at. First of all, we need to develop very accurate enterprise budgets. And I'm going to show you a tool toward the end of my talk today to help you do that. Those enterprise budgets have to include both fixed and variable costs. We'll tell you the difference between the two. And they've got to be very accurate so that you can determine cost of production. Cost of production is so important. Without cost of production, you have no idea if the market prices that you're going to access are adequate to pay for production, plus generate a profit. If you're doing direct marketing, you have no idea what price point to set your products at. So it's really important. The other thing we need to try to do is seek out opportunities to control inputs prices. Can we purchase input prices before the season? Can we purchase those in larger amounts? Maybe we cooperate with a neighbor. Maybe the neighbor and I both use some kind of a packaging material for our CSA, or we use compost. Could we band together and buy twice as much compost than each one of us might use in order to control those input costs? And then finally, we really need to be able to look at managing cash flow. A few years ago, when operating interest notes were in that 3 to 3.5% range, it really didn't matter so much. But we see operating interest now at 9.5 to 10% plus, and that's really an issue. We might be able to change the time at which we buy something. Maybe we delay a purchase, or maybe a product that we might have stored, we might sell earlier. I know in our own operation, on our hay, we typically stack it and sell it in the winter months because typically the prices are a little better. Well, we've really been looking at, maybe we should start selling hay at the end of each one of our cuttings. We might take a little less in price, but that money can go against that operating loan and we're going to pay less interest. So those things are pretty important as we look at the environment we're in today with interest rates as high as they are. So in order to help you do this, my colleagues and I have developed an Excel-based series of spreadsheets that we call Enterprise Profitability and Input Control, or the acronym EPIC. Now, you can find this on our ABM website, and I've included the URL for you. It's a relatively short URL as those go. I can also tell you, if you'll just use your favorite search engine and search CSU space ABM, it's usually the first hit. But I would recommend that you find this website and bookmark it, because in addition to the tools I'm going to talk about today, there's a lot of really good information there. Again, looking at my very dynamic PowerPoint here, you could say, well, that guy needs to learn that there's actually an arrow icon on PowerPoint that would look a whole lot better than his scribbly lines. And I think there's also a pretty nice oval. But if you get to this website, go down to the bottom of the page, click on New Decision Tools, or put your cursor there, then you'll have a screen that says click here. If you click here, it'll take you to a view, another couple of really pretty squigglies. And down to the lower third of that spreadsheet, you're going to find our web page, you're going to find our risk management tools. Depending on the version of PowerPoint, or excuse me, of Excel you have, we've got a couple of different versions. And then also I have what I call the NECO for Northeastern Colorado Composite. So it's actually this spreadsheet with some sample data in it. So you might see how this would work. So the cool thing about this particular tool, it's a series of spreadsheets that you can see at the bottom. It has those spreadsheets outlined. The current version will allow you to produce very, very detailed budgets for up to 5 crops and a cow-calf enterprise. We're currently in the testing phase of the next version, which will include the 5 crops, but will add a breeding, a feeding, and a grazing livestock option. And hopefully that'll be out by the first of the year. As you go on our website, you'll see that we have lots of these Excel-based decision aids, and they're all put together pretty much the same way. And so if you see a green box with blue lettering, that's where you actually enter data. If you have the pale yellow box with blue in it, those typically are where you might put a number in the cell. And then finally, we have some cells that have a red triangle in the upper right corner. And those particular cells, if you hover your cursor over that triangle, it'll give you some more information about the data that needs to go in the cell. So again, what we're really hoping to help producers do is capture both variable cost and fixed cost. Now, when I ask a producer, what does it cost you to produce a bushel of corn, or a weaned calf, or a box of tomatoes? Most producers can tell me within a few cents their variable cost, sometimes known as operating cost, production, or direct cost. Those are the things that vary with the cost of production. It might be seed, it might be fertilizer, it might be feed. And because producers are buying those day in and day out, they know what those costs are. What they fail to have a good grasp on would be what their fixed costs are. We sometimes call those overhead or indirect costs. Some examples would be those things not related directly to production, meaning as your production varies, you still pay these costs. That could be the mortgage on the farm. It could be insurance. It might be real estate taxes. And the problem a lot of producers have is trying to determine how much of those fixed costs they need to allocate to each one of their enterprises. What percent of that mortgage should go to the tomatoes? What should go to the salad greens? What should go to corn? What should go to cattle? And so we've tried to put together a program to make that much easier for producers. So one of the first things that you would do in using EPIC would be to identify the name of your farm, the year in which you're putting your projections together for, and then we've listed several different regions of the state that you could indicate your farm is located. And then we ask you to designate up to 5 crops and that one livestock enterprise, which now this first version is limited to cow-calf. And then what we ask you to do is allocate a percent of your variable expenses to each one of these, a percent of your fixed expenses to each one of these enterprises. And by doing that, then the program will automatically track through and allocate those fixed expenses, like your mortgage, proportionately to each one of your enterprises. That way you accurately capture the fixed cost part of cost of production, or the fixed cost element, and have really a total cost of production, an accurate total cost of production. Now, one of the biggest questions I get when we help people use this program is that all sounds well and good, but you've still not helped me decide how I allocate those overhead expenses. So I'd like to offer 3 methods that you might use. They start from a very easy, very simple method that's probably the least accurate, to one that requires you to have a pretty good set of financial records and is probably the most accurate of the 3. And as I mentioned with this slide, there may be other methods you could use. The easiest method to use is what we call an acreage production unit method. And the basic premise behind this is that irrigated agriculture is more productive and is more expensive. We're going to spend more on inputs as compared to dryland agriculture. And that typically, if we look at cattle, which again was a limiting factor, limiting livestock in its first version, one producing mother cow is equivalent to about 1 unit, or has the ability to produce about as much revenue as 1 acre of irrigated ground. And so if we had a sample operation, and this is actually taken from 7 counties in northeastern Colorado from the 2017 Census of Ag. If you took those counties and commingled the data, you would have a farm that would be comprised of about 560 acres of non-irrigated winter wheat, 500 acres of irrigated corn, 140 acres of irrigated alfalfa, 140 acres of non-irrigated proso millet, 88 acres of non-irrigated sunflower, and 200 mother cows. And so if we use this acreage production unit, we assign production units per enterprise. We find that we have a total of 1,184 production units. Simply divide the production units of each enterprise by the total production units, and by doing that, we would then allocate our overheads using these percentages. So at least we have a method and we have some kind of reasonable way to assign overheads to each enterprise. So that's one method. Again, it's very straightforward. All you have to do is count acres. The next method is suggested our projected gross revenue. So in this case, we use the production units, acres, head, boxes, whatever it might be, times the expected yield times the expected price. And so this one's a little bit more difficult because you're doing this as a planning function before you even plant the crops. In fact, my family used EPIC last week. I just sent information to our lender yesterday, to renew our operating notes. So we've gone through this exercise for 2024. Haven't planted a thing yet. So this requires you to do a little projection. Most people probably have a fairly good idea and can use historical records to determine yield and probably have a fairly good idea what prices would be. But again, it's not exacting. Your yield and your prices obviously can change. So again, using our sample operation, and you can see wheat there, we're projecting a yield of 45 bushels the acre, and this was put together quite some time ago, an average price of $9.05 a bushel. So again, you can see how that works through the equation. Total projected gross revenue of a little over $1 million. And again, dividing the revenue for each enterprise by totals, you would see then that we would split up the overhead costs based on this equation. Final method is one that's probably the most exacting, but requires pretty good financial records. Because in this case, what we're going to use is the actual variable expenses from years past. And hopefully we're going to use an average of those, maybe a 3-year average or a 5-year average. This is more exacting, obviously, because it's using actual data from your operation. But again, it requires that you have pretty good financial records. Some producers do, some don't. And again, you can see that we have a little bit of a change in those numbers. I find this slide to be fairly interesting. This happens to be the comparison of all of those methods. And although you see there's not significant differences, there are differences. And those differences could cause changes in cost of production and could alter your plans. You might market a crop or livestock at a disadvantage because you hadn't properly allocated those overhead expenses. So what I encourage producers to do is start off, and maybe the best you can do is the acreage unit method, but over time improve your record keeping so eventually you get to the variable expense method. And so work into it. So again, I mentioned the Northeastern Colorado composite farm, what that farm would look like. And then I'm going to stop there and ask Colin to bring up an example of the actual spreadsheet. We want to take a look at it. So Colin's done a nice job of kind of blowing this up where you can see it pretty well. Let him get it. And actually what we may do is go ahead and if you'll kind of scroll down so you can get to that menu bar at the bottom, Colin. So you can see the menu bar there. We're on the welcome page. Go ahead and click the basic information tab, please. And again, you've seen this for demonstration purposes. I went ahead and populated this with that composite farm. Go ahead and go to the overhead. So one of the things I'd like to tell you about this is, first of all, when people look at it to begin with, they get really nervous. They see all of that open space and they think, oh my goodness, there's no way I can complete all of that. Well, don't worry about that. We built this with way more capacity than you'd ever need. And so what you can see here, we begin with what's your beginning cash balance in your farmer ranch checking account. Then if you want to maintain a balance so that you don't have overdraft fees, you can put that in, and the program will ensure you do that. And then one of the things that I think is worth its weight in gold, if you look at that interest rate for borrowed operating monies, I've got that set at 8%. Well, if you were borrowing operating capital in 2023, every time the feds raise the rate, your operating capital went up, your operating note line, the interest went up. So the cool thing about this is I can make that one change in interest and it reflects the financial change throughout the operation. So you can do an infinite number of what ifs with this particular program. If you'll go ahead and scroll down a little bit more, you can see our annual debt payments. We give you the opportunity to put in up to 4 different loans, interest and principal. Also note, if you look over to the right, because this is eventually going to populate a spreadsheet, we have you indicate which month a percentage of that payment was made, because you need to do that in order to be able to populate that cash flow. And then Colin, if you can scroll just a little bit so that we can see the right-hand side, you'll see some numbers over. Those are checks. And so if I enter something in those columns to take that percentage and put it in my cash flow, if that check line doesn't equal 100, that tells me I've made a mistake. So if we continue to go down, we can also put in loans for machinery and equipment. We can put in other debt, keep going. We have an opportunity to put in labor. We can put in a FICA rate. We can put in workman's comp. We can take that amount and we can allocate it using the very same allocation numbers we used previously, or in this case, this happens to be some seasonal labor for the cow-calf operation. So we're going to put 100% of that toward the cow-calf operation, and we're going to split it between the months of, it looks like, October and April. Scroll down, farm expenses again that we want to split out by percentage, fuel, oil, repairs, supplies. Keep going down. If we've got overhead and livestock enterprises, we can capture that. Real estate taxes, professional fees, insurance. This is not including crop insurance, so all of that information can be put on. If we go to crop one input, and so this is where we start putting the actual inputs and expenses for an individual crop. And so we've put our projected revenue, again, 45 bushels per acre, $7.50 a bushel. If we have other income, grazing, or whatever that might be, we can capture that. Go ahead and scroll down to the expenses. We can put in tillage, several different tillage operations, the actual cost of seed, the actual cost of the equipment to actual plant the crop. Keep scrolling. Mechanical weed control, irrigation cost, keep going. Fertilizer. And again, we really built this with lots of capacity, probably more than you'd ever need. And then let's go ahead and go to crop one budget. So once you've completed the overhead page, you've allocated those overheads per enterprise, and you've completed the input page, then you produce the budget. And this is really where we want to go, one of the places we want to go. We want to produce a highly accurate budget, a plan for making and expending money, and we want to be able to capture both the direct cost and the overhead and total cost. So if you'll scroll down, you can see all of the input prices. We get the total cost for the total acreage. We get a per acre basis and a per bushel. I want to have you stop right there. This is also kind of an interesting point. This is some actual data for some budgets I put together from northeastern Colorado. So these numbers are fairly accurate. Look at our pre-harvest costs in this particular example. We've got $3.28 a bushel. Then look at our total overhead of almost $2. If we didn't capture the overhead on this particular budget, we might have priced that wheat at maybe $3.70, $3.80, thinking that's a profit, and we lost money. So that, I think, really demonstrates the value of really doing a good job with the overheads. And then go ahead and scroll down a little bit more. The other thing that I like about all of our budgets is we have what's called a sensitivity analysis. And this tells us if we vary yields and we vary prices, what does it do to the bottom line? This actually is a fairly profitable enterprise. And I say that because you don't see a lot of red in that sensitivity analysis. Where you see red is a situation where the yield is low enough and the price is low enough that we show a loss. And so this gives us an idea that this particular enterprise, as we have budgeted it, has a fairly good chance of being profitable. Now, if we do one of these and we see lots of red, that tells us we really have to sharpen our pencil. We've got to do a really, really good job because the chances of making this work aren't nearly as great. Go ahead, if you would, Colin, and you'll need to scroll through the tabs. I want you to pull up the livestock budget, please. Yeah, you're going to, there you go, keep going. And go one more over the livestock budget. There you go, great. So again, the same kind of process with the livestock budget. Scroll down all the way to the bottom to the sensitivity analysis. This one looks a little differently. It takes into account your weaning percentage, your weaning weight, and what it costs you to run a cow for a year, and tells you what the break-even price per pound on a calf is. So a little different process. And then finally, the last thing we want to see, Colin, and it's to the on the tab page, one more over, which is a cash flow. There you go. And so finally, then we have the cash flow statement. And again, there's lots of yellow boxes here, lots of capacity. Go ahead and keep scrolling down. If you want to put in non-farm income, there's a place to do that. Living expenses, you can put that in. So if it's important for you to capture not only the agricultural operation, but your operation in general, you can get that. And then go all the way to the bottom of this. This is where I think this is a really useful tool. Keep going right there. Summary of cash position and operating loan balance. So this really helps us out managing that operating loan, because it tracks what we're paying out in interest. It tracks how that interest is accumulating, gives us an opportunity throughout the year if we want to service part of the interest as part of the principal to see what that does to the bottom line. And then the other thing it does, if you look at that beginning operating loan balance line, kind of in the middle of the page there, that also tells us how much money do we need to borrow? What does that operating line need to reflect? One of the things I tell producers is it's one thing to negotiate an operating loan with a lender. It's another thing to have to go in August because you've used all your money and say, hey, we need to increase that operating line. And so it's really helpful to be able to project the total amount of operating money you might have to be able to make things work. So I'm going to stop there, and do we have some time for some questions? Okay. If not, a little agricultural trivia. What side of a chicken has the most feathers? The outside, right? What do you get when you mate your ewes to hydraulic rams? Still wool, yeah. What do you call a steer with 2 legs? Lean ground beef, yeah. I probably goofed that one up. It's what do you call a steer with no legs? Ground beef, 2 legs, lean ground beef. What do you call a dog with no legs? Anything you want, he can't come to you anyway. I'm 2 degrees from CSU. I know I'm in the wrong part of the state for that, but why did the ram go over the cliff? Didn't see the U-turn. And finally, how do you tell when, and you've got to know a little bit about the terminology for livestock, so bear with me if you don't, but how do you know if a boar, which is a male hog, has reached puberty? He has guilty feelings. Guilts are the females, okay. All right, probably all of that you want. So let's move on. For those of us that aren't great at record keeping, where would you recommend starting to get a better handle on finances? You know, a really good, simple record keeping system for agriculture is Quicken. We use Quicken on our operation. Quicken is cheap, it's easy to get a hold of. Now, the thing you have to do is you have to manipulate Quicken because it was designed for personal finances, which means you've got to change the chart of accounts to reflect agriculture. But there's a lot of good tools out there to do that. And actually, there are 3 community colleges in the state of Colorado that offer online programs on how to utilize QuickBooks, which is a kind of a little higher version of Quicken for agricultural accounting. That would be Morgan Community College in Fort Morgan, Northeastern Junior College in Sterling, and Otero Junior College in La Junta. and they all have online presence. You can take online classes and learn how to use it. So I think Quicken is a great place to start. It's very easy, it's cheap. If you know how to reconcile a checkbook, you can use Quicken. Is it more important to focus on reducing variable or fixed cost when an enterprise is in the red? Both. That was easy. Now, how do you do that? Well, a lot of people, the variable cost thing is fairly easy. I mean, or I shouldn't say fairly, it's more straightforward. Can we buy in bulk? Can we buy at different times of the year? Can we substitute for maybe not the name brand product that we need? Can we collaborate with other producers and buy in bulk? But even the fixed cost, we sit down, and it takes some time because we spend a lot of money in insurance, but we review our insurance policies every year with our insurance agent. It's amazing how much money we've saved when we started doing that. This idea of changing when you make a payment on a loan could be huge. Just a few months so that it fits your income stream better could make a huge difference in your cash flow. So I think you really need to look at both. And it's been my experience working with producers and our own operation, we can always find places to cut. We feel we're pretty efficient, but we can always find places. Risk management tool you would suggest we spend more time learning about. It's going to vary a little bit with your operation. I think we can all do a better job in marketing. I mean, that's probably one of the areas that I know we spend more time on, and that's really benefited us. If you with the information we got about the incidence of hail in this area, you really ought to look at crop insurance or commodity insurance, and that whole thing has broadened itself out. If you're a very diversified producer and you haven't looked at whole farm revenue insurance, you better do it. I think that could really make a huge difference. And so those are a couple of areas I think in risk management that we could all take a look at. And we're getting more and more tools in the crop or commodity insurance realm. Holistic training specifies including enterprise profit. Does this program allow for that? Absolutely. One of the issues that I have with a lot of producers is they only keep records for tax purposes. So they can tell you if their farm and ranch as a whole was profitable. But when you ask them, are each of your enterprises profitable, they have no idea. And so when we finally get them to the point that they have records, a financial record keeping system where they can do enterprise analysis, many times we find they have an underperforming enterprise that may have lost money for decades. And so can we change that enterprise? Or in some cases, we need to just simply do away with it and reallocate those resources. So I think enterprise analysis is crucial. In order to get to enterprise analysis, you have to be able to allocate your income and expenses by enterprise. And actually Quicken will do that. There's a little trick in Quicken called a tag. We set up a tag for each one of our enterprises. And so when we enter an income or expense item, we tag it based on which enterprise generated the expense or the income. Then we can pull a tag report, and I can tell you what our cost of production for corn was last year based on the tag report. And so you've got to be willing to do that. How has your farming background influenced you as an economist? I work with two other economists. We're field economists. One is located in Pueblo. The other is located in Grand Junction. And they both are from farming backgrounds and ranching backgrounds, but I'm the only active farmer at this point. And so I think what I bring to the team is I know what active farmers and ranchers are struggling with. And so, for example, EPIC, I brought that to my colleagues and said, we need this. People could use this. My colleague in Pueblo is great with Excel, so he designed the templates. My colleague in Grand Junction has a great eye for how things look and how they work and how they flow. So that was her contribution. So I think my contribution is what really works. And one of the reasons I try to start my talks off telling you a little bit about my farm is to tell you that I don't come at this as an academic. I come at it as a farmer. And when I told you we actually use EPIC, and we used it last week, we did. And so what I'm advocating are things that we actually use. I think it most definitely can. We've seen it on our own operation. As I mentioned, we bought our farm 23 years ago. It was a total flood irrigated farm. We've spent about $750,000 in 23 years to upgrade irrigation. We only have maybe 10% of the farm that's flood irrigated. It's either irrigated through center pivot sprinkler or subsurface drip. And because we went to that method of irrigation, or those methods, we've gone from conventional tillage to strip till, which is one pass. We're able to plant with the curvature of the pivot, till with the curvature of the pivot. So we've almost eliminated soil erosion, and we have some fields that have some pretty good slope to them. So we use less fertilizer, we use less water, we use less crop protection inputs. So it's definitely made our operation more profitable.
All right, that was our last question. Thank you so much, Brent.